Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Our focus today is going to be on macromolecules. Now, you may know that word. Macro means big, so we're talking about molecules that are very, very large in size. And we'll be talking about 4 primary macromolecules that every living thing needs in order to be able to survive. And I'm not talking about water. I try to make that sound really cool, and it was kind of dorky and nerdy, but you know me well enough by now. That's kind of my personality. Anyways, by the end of this video, hopefully you'll be able to understand the unique properties of carbon, and then also be able to explain and differentiate between the functions and monomers of the 4 key macromolecules that are essential for all life on Earth. So here are your vocabulary terms. I'll be a little offset for this one. Now, a lot of these terms you may have never heard of before, and that's fine. But just keep in mind, these are the ones that you will need to practice with. And we'll do some work in class to make sure you get that idea. But these are the big terms that you need to know to be successful in learning about macromolecules. So we've talked about this before. We talked about organic molecules, and we've talked about how essential carbon is for life. And the reason is that it can covalently bond with many different atoms. It has the ability to share and bond multiple times because it has 4 electrons in its outermost shell. Therefore, it can actually form up to 4 different chemical bonds. So if you look here on the right, we have a molecule of fructose and a molecule of glucose. And you can see how the carbons form ring structures. Glucose looks like a hexagon, and fructose looks like it's in a pentagon structure. The carbons are chemically bonded to each other. They're also bonded to oxygen as well as hydrogen atoms. So you can see there's lots of different ways that carbon can bond, and that creates all of the different molecules that are essential for life. So let's talk about some of these molecular chains. Remember, we talked a little bit before that the term macromolecule just simply means it is a large molecule. It's not something that is small. It's going to have hundreds, even thousands of atoms that are attached to it. Now, these chains are made up of small units that are called monomers. The root mono means one. And those monomers, if we get a bunch of them, that makes up what's called a polymer. The root poly means many. So a monomer, you'll find, is a subunit of some of the macromolecules we'll talk about. And when those subunits repeat, meaning there's multiple, there could be hundreds of thousands of these monomers that are chemically bonded together, that makes up a polymer. So the monomers repeat. They're either exactly the same or very, very similar to one another, but they repeat, and as they repeat, they build a long chain that's called a polymer. So keep in mind, macromolecules are large, small units are monomers, and those monomers make up what are called polymers. So keep in mind that there are 4 key macromolecules that are essential to life. There are carbohydrates, which you've probably heard of before. You think of those as like sugars and starches. Lipids, which are things like fats and oils. Proteins, which, that are found in meats and things like that. And nucleic acids, which include things like DNA and RNA. So let's talk about each. So first off, we'll talk about carbohydrates. Now, the monomer for this is known as a monosaccharide. The root saccharide essentially means sugar, and the root mono means one. So this is a single sugar. So if we look to the right here, glucose is an example of a monosaccharide. A disaccharide would be something like sucrose. And notice the monomers are in ring form, so we can determine how many monomers there are based on the number of ring structures that are present. So in glucose, there's 1 ring structure, so it's a monosaccharide. Sucrose has 2, so it is a disaccharide. Now, when we get a bunch of those glucose molecules together, or a bunch of those monosaccharides together, we create what is called a polysaccharide, meaning that there are many sugars attached to one another. And you can see that at the bottom here where we have amylose, which is a polysaccharide, also known as a starch. Now, the uses for carbohydrates are many. They provide immediate energy for the body. They're a main component of the cell walls for plants and are involved in cell-to-cell communication. Now, keep in mind, these include sugars as well. So the sugar you intake, you probably heard of fructose, glucose, galactose. Lactose is a sugar that is found in milk. You've probably heard of lactose intolerance before. meaning you can't digest that sugar. Now keep in mind, most carbohydrates that you're going to encounter in this class will end in ose. That's a key way to know that you have a carbohydrate, or more specifically, a sugar. So notice we've got glucose, sucrose, amylose, lactose. If it ends in ose, it is a sugar, which implies that it is also a carbohydrate. Next we have lipids, and the monomer of a lipid is a fatty acid. Now if you look, lipids are found in long carbon chains, and this is a very short fatty acid if you look off to the right. Fatty acids can have carbon chains that are hundreds of carbons in length. And there are actually multiple types of fatty acids. Ones you may want to know would include saturated fatty acids and unsaturated. If you notice, saturated has no double bond, but if you look at unsaturated, in the middle there's two lines between two carbons. That indicates a double bond, and that is the difference between saturated and unsaturated, is the presence of that double bond. Now lipids are primarily used for energy storage in the body. So if the body doesn't have any carbohydrates, it will go to lipids in order to obtain its energy. That's why the low carb diet is so popular, because you eliminate the carbohydrates, therefore your body starts using fat as its main source of energy. Lipids are also a major component in the cell membrane, which is the outer part of the cell that allows things to go in and out. Now this also includes things like fats, oils, and soaps are made of lipids as well. And the key thing to keep in mind here, lipids are non-polar. If they're non-polar, that means that they will not dissolve in water, right? I go back to my oil and water example. Oil will not mix with water because water is polar and oil is non-polar. So keep in mind, the monomer of a lipid is a fatty acid, and that's what those long chains are. You get multiple of those fatty acids together. In fact, a lot of times they occur in groups of 3, and that's what's known as actually a triglyceride. Proteins are very important for this class, so make sure you're paying attention. The monomer is known as an amino acid, and there are 20 different amino acids that can make up a protein. The sequence of those amino acids determines what the protein does and the function of the protein. Now, proteins are primarily used for structure in the body. That includes muscles, cell transport, moving things in and out of the cell, and something known as enzymes, which you'll become very familiar with in the next video. Those enzymes speed up chemical reactions in the body. They also end in ACE. So keep in mind, OSes are your sugars and carbohydrates. Your ACEs are your enzymes and proteins. So because enzymes speed up chemical reactions, ACEs break down OSes. So lactase is an enzyme that will break down lactose. Also keep in mind that the chemical bonds that occur between amino acids and a protein are known as peptide bonds. So a new type of chemical bond here. Those peptide bonds are those chemical bonds found in between the amino acids. So on the right here we have a protein, which is made up of, looks to be close to 40 or 50 different amino acids. Now again, the sequence of amino acids that are there determines the function of the protein as well as the structure of it. Keep in mind that proteins play an essential role in life. And last but not least, we have nucleic acids. Now the monomer is known as a nucleotide, and nucleic acids are used for storing genetic information of all of life. So our genetic storing unit is known as DNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Some use RNA, which is just ribonucleic acid, but all of these are made up of monomers, known as nucleotides. And all of the information about who we are, what species we are, what color hair we have, to an extent, diseases that run in our family, potentially intelligence, all of these things are found inside of this molecule of DNA. So nucleic acid essentially codes the information for what life is. It's a very interesting and fascinating molecule that we will study a little bit later on. But keep in mind, the monomers are nucleotides, and it stores the genetic information for all of life. So hopefully you have a basic understanding of all of these different macromolecules. I know I throw a lot of information at you very quickly, but we are going to spend an extensive amount of time of class working on understanding what these macromolecules are and what they do inside of our bodies. So keep in mind that carbon atoms have unique properties which allow for many of the life essential molecules to exist. and that the four major macromolecules make up a good majority of the materials that are inside of the cells in our body. So I don't have any special question for you today, but hopefully by the end of this video you should be able to understand the uniqueness of carbon and explain and differentiate between the functions and monomers of the four key macromolecules essential for all life. Hopefully you had a good time watching this video. Again, we will practice with all of these macromolecules when you come back to class. Have a great day, guys, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.